You have likely heard me say on a number of occasions that I'm constantly surprised that the writers of the Old and the New Testament, the biblical story about the journey of faith, I'm surprised that they so often provide us with lessons that describe how hurtful we might be as people, and how we oftentimes do things that are so contrary to both good judgment and the wisdom we've been given, and how we oftentimes deny who we are as children of God and followers of Jesus. And so I was thinking this week about Peter. And you know about Peter, of course. He was one of the incredibly powerful leaders of the early church, following the death and resurrection of Jesus, but particularly following the moment of Pentecost, when Peter was infused with the power and the energy and the strength and the courage that came from the Spirit. Now, let me share this story that comes out of Mark. And by the way, every other of the four Gospels contain this story as well. Peter was still down in the courtyard when one of the high priest's servant girls came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked straight at him and said, "You too were with Jesus of Nazareth." But he denied it. "I don't know. I don't understand what you are talking about," he answered, and went out into the passageway. Just then a rooster crowed. The servant girls saw him there and began to repeat to the bystanders, "He is one of them." But Peter denied it again. And a little while later, the bystander accused Peter again. "You can't deny that you are one of them, because you too are from Galilee." Then Peter made a vow, "May God punish me if I am not telling the truth. I do not know the man you are talking about." Just then a rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows 2 times, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." And he broke down and he cried. Now, as you read through the Hebrew scriptures, you find all kinds of examples of human behavior that clearly is contrary to the call of our Creator to be loving, to be kind, to be gentle, to be affirming of one another as part of the human family. It starts almost from the beginning. As we read in Genesis, Cain and Abel have this great debate, and then that sibling rivalry ends up in the death of one of the brothers. There is an example also of the way in which David, who had been chosen by God to be the king, was constantly pursued by the other leader, Saul and Samuel. They wanted to destroy him because they wanted to be king. One of the benedictions, as I recall, that King David gave was, "The Lord be with you," as he was meeting with his potential executioner. "The Lord be with you." And I remember a professor saying how wise David was, that he reminded this one who wanted to kill him that God would be with him always, keeping an eye on him. Well, the story clearly of David, who lusts after the wife of his most trusted general Uriah. Why do we hear that story? Well, we hear that story because it demonstrates clearly one of the very powerful messages that come to us from the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not covet not just my neighbor's possessions, but my neighbor's wife. And thou shalt not kill and hate. And so what David decides to do, since now he and Bathsheba have had a painful relationship, she is now pregnant, and indeed he's got to cover his track. And so he sets it up for David, for Uriah to come back so that he might be with his wife, and he would then know it was he who had caused the pregnancy and not David. But Uriah wouldn't buy into it. So David has him killed. Why do we hear about that? Or why do we hear about all the other examples of our behavior in the Old and New Testament that demonstrate that we oftentimes, many times, consistently struggle to be truthful to our commitment to the one who gave us life, who nurtures us in our living so that indeed we might be able to find joy and relationships that are healthy and wonderful. The story of Peter is fascinating. Peter is chosen by Jesus to be a disciple. His name was Simon. And Jesus immediately gave him a new name, Peter, which we are told means rock, stone, solid. Well, you may recall that Peter frequently was not that solid rock, faithful, trusting person. And oftentimes Peter questioned or demonstrated an enormous amount of misunderstanding and indeed significant fear. Remember the time they were in the boat and Jesus came walking across, and Peter shouted out with fear, "It's a ghost!" No, it was not a ghost, it was Jesus. Or the times that Peter oftentimes was questioned about whether he was indeed going to be faithful. And so Jesus said to the disciples, "Who do people say that I am? What are the rumors out there? You're out there. What are the rumors? What are people saying?" And they all said, "Well, you're the returned prophet. You are John the Baptist come back to life." And Peter, with boldness, says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." Well, at that point, Jesus says to him, "It is upon you, the rock, that I shall build my church." Now, you may remember that in the upper room, celebrating the Seder feast, which is the Jewish celebration of the Passover, Jesus is talking to his disciples. They experience a great conversation, a meal, no doubt memories about how God had been present in the life and experiences of the people of Israel as they repeated that Seder experience. And then Jesus offers the bread and the cup, reminding them that he would give his body and shed his blood for them and for the whole world. And then he says to them, "You will all leave me. You will deny me. You will run away." And all the disciples say, oh no, we'll never do that. Peter boldly says, "I will never run away. I will die with you." Jesus said, "No, you will all run away. And Peter, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows twice." Now, why include those stories about Peter? We'd like to have stories about people who follow Jesus to be positive stories, enlightening stories, uplifting stories of folks who were faithful and loyal and responsive to the things they said they would do. But we know that in the garden, following Jesus' meal with the disciples, they all fell asleep. We know that when Jesus was arrested and taken in to be interrogated, Peter standing there trying to warm himself up. One could draw conclusions to that, trying to build some fire under his courage. He is questioned and he lies. He lies. He lies to save his skin. Mark Twain, who was one of the great theologians of history, once said, if you tell the truth the first time, you don't have to ever remember anything. Have we not said that to our children? If you tell the truth the first time, you don't have to remember anything. It was Nietzsche who once said, I feel most sad about the fact that you lie to me, but I feel even more sad that I no longer feel that I can believe you. So 3 times he says, oh no, not me. Psychologists have demonstrated, I think, with a lot of examples and research, human behavior is just incredibly remarkable. Any of you who have raised children know that very quickly children learn how to cover their mistakes in their lives. If you taught children, you know that that's been the case. If you've babysat with children, you know that that's the case. Children very early on find ways to cover themselves, and even adults do that. I've told some of you the story that Nancy said to me, Irv, you got to get hearing aids because you're beginning to answer questions that people aren't asking. I said, oh no, that's not the case. I'm just so perceptive that I answer the questions I haven't asked yet. Now, that felt good to say, but it was a lie. The truth of the matter was that I was not hearing. Psychologists do say we all lie. We all lie. Sometimes they're just fibs. Sometimes they're just little, we call them white lies. When someone says, what do you think about the way I've just painted my house? We say, oh, it looks wonderful, even though we think it looks terrible. I've now stopped saying to the women I meet who have had new hairdos, oh, I like your new haircut. Because more often than not, they say to me, I hate it. We do lie. And the tragedy is that when we lie, we begin to demonstrate that we are no longer to be believed, no longer to be trusted. And that's what Peter was experiencing, and I think he began to realize that. It is wonderful that we hear this example of Peter, who, after denying Jesus 3 times to a little girl, to somebody else who's standing there, and yet to another person who says, oh, we know that you are a follower of Jesus. He said no. And he now lied to those folks, but he also had lied to Jesus when he said, I will go to death with you. And he lied to Jesus when he said, I know who you are, you're the Messiah. If you're the Messiah, why are you lying? So not only is he lying repeatedly, I suppose psychologists might call him a pathological liar, or at least a compulsive liar, or at best, perhaps just a natural liar who was trying to cover his skin, trying to save himself. We know that the disciples then went into hiding. The disciples decided that they too were going to be captured and destroyed in the same way their leader had been killed. And we know that that went on for a long time because, according to the writer of the Acts of the Apostles, it was 30 days before they gathered together for the Pentecostal experience. But it was the infusing of the Spirit that somehow touched that cleansing tear of Peter, who, when he discovered he'd been a liar, he wept, he cried. And in the process of being infused by the Spirit, he now is a bold person. And he can stand before all and say, I believe, and I will follow him to the death. Peter was one of the early martyrs of the Christian church. One of the early martyrs of those who had decided that having life on this earth and lying was not worth it if you indeed follow Jesus, because life on earth was temporary. And those who somehow understood that you were living your faith powerfully, even though it was at risk of being destroyed through execution or punishment or stoning. The most wonderful and powerful example that we have of the early Christians was Stephen, who was stoned to death. And while he's being stoned to death, he's giving God thanks for the presence of his Spirit and asking that they be forgiven. So, thank you, writers and inspired persons who share with us the failures and the mistakes and the errors and the sins and the denials and the lies of those who followed Jesus and who were forgiven and who came alive, because we can see ourselves in them. Remember, Coach, you've told me this. Others have told me this. We learn far more from our mistakes than our successes. Learn from those mistakes in the Old and New Testament. Learn from those errors. Learn from those sins, because we might indeed avoid repeating them over and over again. May we go in peace, and may the peace of God always go with us, that we might learn from the gift of your love and the gift of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Now, our concluding song, which I think probably, I'm not remember, that probably has a minor key, so it sounds a little heavy. But it's a word called shalom. And shalom in Hebrew means a number of things. It means hello, it means peace, it means a whole host of things. So there's just one verse I'm going to ask the organist and pianist to play it through one time, and then join me as we sing the English words to shalom. God bless you, each of you.